You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rosales. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, I've got trust on the brain lately. I guess one of the reasons.
What happened?
One of the reasons, there are probably many reasons for it, but one of the reasons that I have trust on the brain is, remember a couple weeks ago, we were talking on this podcast to Vlad Kazan.
Yes.
For those of us, or for those listeners who didn't catch that episode, he's the Romanian guy who co-founded this company called K Factory. And in recent years, they started branching out into selling to the UK too. So they've gone from strictly Romania to Romania plus UK. And he was talking about some of the challenges they've had in that process and how they've been overcoming them. And one of the themes underlying a lot of what he was saying was that a big part of his sales expansion was the building of trust. And how do you get people to trust you when you're the new kid in town? Or I think you used a great phrase, you and he used a great phrase, when you're basically expanding your sandbox.
Yes.
How do you get people to trust you and not say, well, I'm just one of the many grains of sand in your sandbox? How do you get them to trust you? So do you mind if I dig into that a little bit today?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the main aspects of building trust, and this is one of the main concepts that Robert Cialdini mentions in his book, Influence of Psychology. Well, you and I are both laughing because you and I, we have mixed feelings about Cialdini. We taught a seminar on that together years ago. And I think that teaching that seminar scarred us both. That we're both highly suspect of some of his principles. I think we even did a podcast episode on that at one point a year or two ago. And so, some of the principles and examples that he uses in that book, they're less dated and cheesy. And one of the less dated and cheesy principles is commitment.
Yeah.
And Vlad talks about a number of things that showed commitment. One is that his company, K Factory, really focused on one particular country. In this case, it was the UK. UK companies, they weren't particularly new to K Factory, and that company had even done some work for some major subsidiaries in Romania. But that wasn't enough. K Factory was still the new kid in town as far as the UK headquarters were concerned. So they joined an incubator or accelerator in Romania called Innovex. And by the way, dear listeners, Alper and I know Innovex. We've been to one of their events, one about 5 years ago. It was one of their early events, I think, and I spoke at that event. And
yes,
in fact, speaking of that event, speaking of that event, it was a total disaster. The event was not a disaster, but my speech was a disaster. And keen listeners to this podcast will know that was the event. The event that we were at was the one where we were analyzing it in public here on this podcast a few months ago with Brad Ferris.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to K Factory and Innovex. So Innovex is an incubator and accelerator. And when a lot of people think of incubators or accelerators, they think of new companies. But at that time, Vlad's company was not a new company. They were founded about 5 years earlier. They had for years had customers. They had a product, they had revenue, they had profits. Both of its co-founders had already been in the industry for decades. So K Factory, the company K Factory, it was a going concern. It wasn't a brand new company. But their commitment to making it in the UK was so strong that even though they were already a going concern, they went back to this accelerator, Innovex, and joined its program because one of the Innovex features was a relationship with the British Embassy. And through that, K Factory was hoping to get some introductions in the UK. Another aspect of K Factory's approach, in addition to getting some introductions from some known players, in addition to that, another aspect of their approach to commitment was that theirs was not what I call a spray and pray approach to selling abroad. It was not that approach. They didn't just say, oh, we want to sell abroad, and then they go to, country number one and knock on its doors for a couple weeks and When nothing comes of that, they go to country number two and knock on its doors for a couple of weeks, and they just go on and on down the list, et cetera, like that, so forth, so on, so like that. No, what
I
they
didn't know that phrase. Is this something that you came up with?
which phrase?
The spray and pray.
Spray and pray. It's a phrase that I use a lot, probably a lot that it's closely associated with Matt Krause, but it's not a Matt Krause original. So somebody else before me has said spray and pray. So anyway, so this company, K Factory, so they didn't spray and pray. What they did was they said, it's the UK man, and they focused their efforts on the UK. Another is that K Factory established a company in the UK before they had any customers there. And like Vlad said, setting up a company in a place is really easy. You can even do it online from your own living room couch if you want. For example, I could probably set up a company in the Isle of Man if I wanted. I don't even know where the Isle of Man is.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah. Do you know where the Isle of Man is?
No idea.
Yeah. We're both well-educated people, but we have no idea where the Isle of Man is. But still, if we wanted to, we could probably set up a company there right from our own couches in our own living rooms. And all we would need is an internet connection and a credit card. But setting up a company in a country is basically a stake in the ground. It says to your customer that, yeah, I have some level of commitment to your country. You're not just some randomly selected grain of sand in my very large sandbox.
Yes.
So even though setting up a company in a country is really easy, it's not, it's basically a stake in the ground. And perhaps more significantly, it tells the customer that if you are signing a contract, you're signing a contract with an entity from your own country. And if there is a problem, you can settle it in your own country with judges who speak your own language.
Yeah,
you're not going to have, you're not going to have to.
That's one of the most important points.
Yeah, you're not going to have to hire some, foreign lawyer in a foreign country that you've never even been to and throw yourself on the mercy of some court system that you hoped to never have to understand. You're not going to have to do that. So I guess that what I'm trying to say is that when you're trying to build trust outside your home country, focus your efforts on one place and keep banging on that door until it opens. If one kind of banging doesn't work, try another one. And if that doesn't work, try another one. Try 2 or 3 or 4 different ways, whatever it takes. Try them all at the same time if you like, whatever it takes. But keep banging on that country's particular door. Don't do this spray and pray approach and hope that something works.
Okay.
And now, since this is a presentation podcast, let's get down to some presentation design related stuff like pitch decks and sales presentations and stuff like that. So here I'm going to suggest a couple ways that you can build this kind of trust building into your presentation. And by the way, dear listeners, remember to inject a dose of reality into your expectations. You can't skip on all the hard work stuff, like the stuff that Vlad mentioned, and then make up for it with some magic pitch deck that magically makes the customer love you. It just doesn't happen like that. So what I talk about next, it's not a magic bullet. You've got to have all those bigger picture things in place, and then a good pitch deck or presentation will help you. Don't think that you can skimp on all that stuff and just call it Matt and Alper and magically you're going to start selling to the UK. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that. Okay, so anyway, I was just talking about pitch decks here. But I should correct myself and remind everyone here that the pitch deck is just one part of the presentation. And there's so much more to a presentation. That's what we've been talking about on this podcast for a couple of years. It's stuff like, what you talk about, the clothes you wear, how you deal with the inevitable, unexpected things that come up in your presentation, stuff like that. So keep in mind that your presentation is much more than just the PowerPoint. And so that's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. All right.
So anyway, back to your presentations and how you appear to that customer. So you're not from that country. You might speak with a weird accent, stuff like that. So it's obvious that you're not from around there, but there's another way to do this, another way to build trust, even if you're not from that area. And that is to be from the same industry or to think in the same mindset. So your presentation should be heavy on customers that you've worked with who were in the same industry as your potential customer. And that means that, for example, if your potential customer is an auto parts manufacturer, an example of you working with a, say, food manufacturer, that's probably not going to do the trick. It has to be someone from the same industry.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to building trust, one of the things that you can do is describing the problem. And if you are in the same industry or if you have the same mindset, you're going to be particularly good at this. Berk Temirolu mentioned this, the need to describe the problem and not just jump to discussing the solution. I think it was, Alper, do you remember? It was about, I don't know, 10 episodes ago or something like that, where we interviewed Berk. Do you remember that?
Yes, of course. And we talked about expansion into the new markets as well.
Yeah. And so a good rule of thumb, kind of riffing on the subject, a good rule of thumb is that whatever time you feel that you need to spend describing the problem, you should probably double it. It's not just a little increase, it's a big increase,
Hmm.
double that amount of time. Tell stories about past customers who are having that problem. Talk about why people have that problem. Talk about, aspects of that problem that only industry insiders would know.
Hmm.
And the reason that you spend so much time talking about the problem is not actually to show the customer that you understand the problem. That's not why you're doing it. It's to build trust, because the better you can describe the problem, the more the customer is going to think this person really gets me. This person knows what I'm up against. So
Yeah.
you're building trust. The more you describe the problem. Q&A is another great place to do this because it gives you a chance to do two things. It gives you a chance to restate the problem in your own words, which shows that you understand it because you understand it well enough to put it into your own words. And at the beginning of your answer, tell a story. The story doesn't need to be long. For a business story, a couple sentences usually does the job. Tell a story about a customer of yours who was facing this problem, and that gives your audience trust because they know that you have seen this problem getting solved before. They know that it's not new to you. So from there, at this point, I got to thinking about the physical aspects of trust. How, like with fear, there's the amygdala,
Hmm.
and with stress, there's cortisol. And with happiness, there's dopamine. There's these parts of the body or these hormones that are associated with an emotion. I got to wondering stuff like, is there a trust center of the brain? Are there trust hormones? And here's what I found, or at least I'll just mention a couple things that I found. One is that I ran across a study from the University of Georgia. It was on the NIH website. And for those listeners who are not familiar with the NIH, NIH is a US governmental agency. And NIH, by the way, stands for National Institutes of Health. And Alper, I'm wondering, have you heard of the NIH?
A lot, actually, because I do a
Okay.
lot of research and their website usually comes the first.
Yeah, for some reason, their website, the NIH website, SEOs really well. It's usually at the top for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, according to the study, this study from the University of Georgia, according to the study, there is in fact a part of the brain that is tied to the propensity of trust, and that part of the brain is called the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. I had to look at my notes to make sure that I said that right, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. So in other words, a part of the brain up near the front, near the part which is engaged in rational thought and deciding whether your logic is good.
Ask me that name again in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Albert, what is that name? It's like it probably doesn't even take 30 seconds. And
Vanished.
yeah, the only reason that I remember it, it is, by the way, dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. The only reason that I remember it, by the way, is that I am reading it directly from my notes. Otherwise, I too would forget it.
Ah, okay.
So don't feel bad. So anyway, other parts of the brain are mentioned too
Hmm.
in this study. For example, volume in the right side of the amygdala is apparently also involved with the
That
tendency.
is my favorite part.
Oh yeah, I love
Yeah.
the amygdala too. It comes up so many times in the presentation world because the amygdala is like involved with fear, right?
I think it's one of the things that it is involved with,
Yeah,
and it's very
fear and
easy to trigger
adrenaline.
that, by the way.
Yeah, the amygdala. It's like pretty much anything is going to trigger the amygdala. I like if I turned on the light next to me, it would probably trigger my amygdala. So anyway, we presentation trainers and pretty much everybody else, including light bulb designers, run across the amygdala often. So anyway, this part of or this side of the amygdala is apparently involved with the tendency to rate faces as more trustworthy
Oh
or
yeah,
distrustworthy.
yeah.
So, for example, if Susan says a lot, I don't know why, that person's face just seems honest. It seems like a really gut level decision that Susan is making. And maybe the reason that she says that is that she has a really big right amygdala. But there are two really big caveats here in citing this University of Georgia study. One is that these things are the propensity to trust. They're the tendency to trust. So they are not trust itself. They're the
Hmm.
tendency to trust someone.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not like if you activate these parts of the brain, people automatically are going to love you. It's not like, okay, trigger the right side of the amygdala and then people will trust you. It's like magic. It's not like that at all.
Okay.
And another big caveat is, in this study's own words, however, and I'm quoting here from the study, however, it is currently unknown how localized structure within healthy human brain or within the healthy human brain is associated with a tendency to trust other people. So in other words, we don't know.
Hang on. This this was like a detailed research paper, and
Yeah,
it
it
finishes
was
by we just don't know.
well, we don't know. That's Matt's way of putting it. But this, however, it is currently unknown, blah, blah, blah. That
Hmm.
part it's not at the end of the study. It's at the beginning of the study, like right there in the abstract. It says,
Okay.
the abstract basically says, we don't know.
So
So
read the rest of this study at your own
yeah,
risk.
yeah, read the rest of the study and just hope to God that you get something of value out of it. So,
Okay.
so it's not like there's a clear part of the brain that you can target. It's not like there's a clear part of the brain where if you light it up, you're going to sell your stuff to the UK. There's way too many factors that go into building trust.
Okay.
And then there's one more study that I wanted to mention. And the reason that I wanted to mention it, well, it was an interesting study in its own right, but it's also from the Washington State University, which is a university in the US. And by the way, full disclosure, and the reason I wanted to mention it is that I have a lot of I have a lot of friends who went to WSU. Go Cougs. So anyway, that study, the WSU study, mentioned that AI as in uh, uh, why am I blanking out on the term? Something intelligence. Help me out here,
Artificial
Albert.
intelligence?
Artificial. There you go. Yeah. The most, one of the most common phrases these days. Okay, that study mentioned that AI or artificial intelligence is a turnoff for customers.
You remember
And
dorsomedial, but
yeah, I could say dorsomedial, but remembering artificial intelligence, I forget that one. Okay.
okay.
So anyway, this study, other than saying that AI is a turnoff for consumers, the study didn't go much further than that. But I suspect that if they had dug deeper, they would come to the conclusion that people just like stuff with other people behind it. That's the non-scientific way of putting it. People just like other stuff, or people just like stuff with other people behind it.
Hmm.
So in your presentation, be sure to include some humans in your shots. If it's a sales presentation for some factory equipment, for example, there's a tendency just to have a bunch of pictures of, conveyor belts and machines and rollers
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So, but include some human shots in there too. And we've talked on this podcast many times about stock photography, and do not use stock photography, stock photography where everybody is smiling and the lighting is just way too high, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's wearing blue, et cetera, et cetera. People are going to know that those shots are fake and it's going to work against you. So just go out onto the factory floor, take a few shots of some real people making your product, tell them to smile a bit. Don't worry about, the stain on their shirt or something like that. So anyway, that's my spiel for today. It's that the story of Vlad Kazan and K Factory breaking into the UK is a story of commitment, persistence, and knowing someone who can introduce you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
I have so many questions.
well,
Some of
let's.
some of them got dropped on the way because you and I exchanged some conversations, but
And don't. So go for it with the questions, but try to stay away from naming parts of the brain because I promise you I'm not going to remember the pre-dorsoventral whatever it was part of the brain.
okay. Actually, my main did you read the entirety of the study, by the way?
I read I read the abstract summary of the study and about the first half of the study. Yeah.
Okay, because I was wondering, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was you talked about a lot about trust.
Mm,
And I think it's one of the least measurable things, but the most
yeah.
important decision factors, let's say, in a human being.
Yeah.
I was
Absolutely.
wondering if there was, like how they put people under MRI machines. I was wondering if they came up with a way to measure trust through any metrics or indicators.
Well, I don't know, but which is basically the result of that study. So, but anyway, So they found a part of the brain which was involved in the trust that they were looking for. And usually, when people are finding parts of the brain, there's an MRI machine involved in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's what they were doing,
Okay.
because I don't remember off the top of my head, but maybe they were using an MRI machine or something like that.
Okay. And when you kept talking about trust, this
Yeah.
idea of its fragility came into my mind. Like, it's amazing how fragile it can be. I mean, it can take
Yeah.
maybe 10 years to build trust and then
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
10 seconds to shatter it.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And I was wondering if, let's say I'm making the presentation, let's say with the realm of the presentations, I'm making the presentation, I'm building a case,
Uh-huh.
hoping that I'm building the trust, but something happens. One of my data gets challenged, or something that I say doesn't sit well with one of the audience members, and I feel that that trust is about to be broken. Do you think there are ways that we can employ to rebuild it once we realize that, okay, maybe there's a breach of trust here
Yeah.
and I need to do something about it?
Yeah, play through it basically. And you've gone into this in a recent episode of the podcast, which is that when you run into a problem in your presentation, the solution that I'm about to suggest is very similar to what you were suggesting, which is that when you run into a problem in your presentation, don't stress about trying to pretend that the problem doesn't exist. It's perfectly fine to admit that you have the problem, because if you're trying to build trust, people don't want to see, remember that AI study, people don't want to see perfection. That's not where trust comes from. Trust doesn't come from the perception that everything I do is perfect. Trust comes from showing up repeatedly and being a nice person in difficult situations. So, like, for example, I think we gave the example in that previous podcast episode of, like, if your projector bulb goes out or something like that, don't try to pretend the projector didn't just die. People aren't going to be freaked out by the fact that something kind of sort of out of your control happened. Admit it. And so if you're trying to build trust, and if you're trying to build trust, and if you are selling something highly technical or highly specialized, like most of these people are going to ask a lot of very challenging questions, and you're not going to have the answer to all of them, or they're not going to agree with you all the time. Don't be flustered by that. It's perfectly okay to admit to disagreement. And people want to see how you act in that situation, that moment of disagreement, and how you handle that disagreement, and how you hold your ground while still listening to the other person. That moment is what people are watching to see, can I trust this person or not? They're not looking for perfection.
Actually, that would be an interesting point to dig deeper in future episodes. That thing you said about the AI being a turnoff for consumers, and it's something that the study was mentioning, right? If I understood you correctly.
Yeah, you mean about the AI?
Yeah.
Yeah, the study was about how consumers trust stuff less when it has been produced by AI. And the study was basically, if I sum it up in my non-scientific terms, the study was basically humans trust other humans. If they see something perfect that was produced by a machine, they don't trust it more because it is perfect. They trust things that come from humans, and even if they are not perfect.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think we have the capacity to smell foul play or some less trustworthy situations, let's say a mile away.
Yeah, if, to use that light bulb example, if the light bulb in your projector goes out and you try to pretend that there isn't a problem, people are going to smell that a mile away, and they're going to know that you're covering up a problem. So it's best to just admit it and, stay calm and, change the light bulb or something. Don't try to pretend that nothing ever happened.
I think it's very difficult to pretend that the light bulb has not gone off. I mean, it's right in front of them.
Yeah, it's so obvious.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, so let's wrap it up for today. And then if we have other questions that come up, we can deal with them next time.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, Alper, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rosales. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.